That's just great. Before we start, I'm going to ask you to silence yourself, please. Here comes the mayor. Amanda? That's Amanda. I got your place right there. The next one, those girls are holding it for you. It's the Girl Scouts. Come on up here.
Yes. Get some pictures here and there.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get started, please. You'll take your seats. My name is Frances Cutting. I'm representing the Colonial Dames, 17th century, the Reverend Robert Pierre Chapter here in Augusta. And we want to welcome you to the plaque dedication marking of two historic buildings, the 1860 Court of Ordinary of Richmond County and the 1869 Congregation Children of Israel. It is the oldest standing synagogue in the state of Georgia. A primary objective of our society is the recognition of historic sites. I now will ask our Juliet Girl Scouts, Amani and Madison, to lead us in the pledge. Will you please stand?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please remain standing, and I will ask Rabbi David Cyril to please have our invocation.
It's an honor to be preceded by the Girl Scouts. Almighty God, in whose hands are the souls of all the living and the spirit of all beings, praise be to you, has sustained us in life and has privileged us to reach this milestone occasion. We humbly invoke thy grace upon all who have contributed toward making this historic edifice a living reality. We're grateful for having been enabled to contribute morally, spiritually, and materially toward our basic objective, the conservation and perpetuation of our hallowed heritage, our history, our people, and our land. Please bear in mind that in addition to the markers we'll soon dedicate, this structure rests upon a marker of affirmation, values and beliefs that are immune to the corrosions to which the material and earthly are subject. But may there rise from this place that undying spirit which has ever inspired the Jewish people to be builders of civilization. May we all be imbued with the strength to continue our joint labor of love, to complete this wonderful museum, to be privileged to walk, appreciate, and expand our minds within its great walls. And finally, grant us the vision and understanding to realize that when we work to preserve these traditions and immortal values, we ourselves are enriched, our lives made more meaningful, and the survival of our cultures more firmly assured. Grant peace for us and all who dwell in our midst. Amen.
Be seated, please. I would like to welcome special members of our community who are with us today. Mrs. Amelia Pelton, who is president of the State Society Colonial Dames 17th Century. Thank you for coming over from.
Okay.
We have our chapter president, Ms. Daphne Hobson. We have the Honorable Garnett Johnson, who is mayor of Augusta, Richmond County. We thank you for coming. We have the Honorable Doug Duncan, who is chairman of Columbia County Commission. Jack Weinstein, there you are. Jack is the president of the Augusta Jewish Museum Board. Eric Montgomery, who is Historic Augusta Executive Director. And we have Miss Augusta, Queen Shell, who's going to thank you all for being here, and we're hoping the weather holds for a while. Now I'll ask Miss Amelia Pelton to come forward and bring greetings from the Colonial Dames.
Thank you so much, Francis. It's my honor to be here today as president of Georgia Colonial Dames 17th Century. We are so proud of this Pierre Robert Chapter in marking these two markers today. Colonial Dames 17th Century is an organization that greatly celebrates history and everything having to do with history. We trace our lineage back to colonial America prior to 1701, a living, working adult. And we welcome members. I'm sure Daphne Hobson would love to speak to you if you're interested in our organization. We welcome everyone. We are the second largest genealogical society in the state of Georgia. We have over 800 members strong, and our spring conference is coming up soon in Milledgeville, where I'm from. And on a personal note, I'm so excited to be here. My husband is Jewish, and his family, of course. And my mother was the soloist at Spring Hill Avenue Temple in Mobile, where I grew up for many, many years. Jack and I are already best friends. We just found out we're both from Mobile, and we've been having an old home week. So again, I applaud this chapter and Daphne as president, and I welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Johnson, do you want to give greetings, please?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Garnett Johnson. I have the high privilege of being the 85th mayor for the city of Augusta. First of all, let me thank the people behind the scenes to make this happen. It gives me a great honor to be here today as we pay homage to many of you who contributed not only your time, but your talent and also your money to make this happen. I think it's special. We have a rich tradition of Jewish in our community, and I thank you guys for everything that you've done to continue to make this city better. I thank you for everything that you continue to do. Mr. Weinstein, I think I told you earlier, you guys run a great business, and thank you for all of the other things you do outside of business. Thank you. But on behalf of the city of Augusta, our more than 200,000 residents that call it home, and our 303,000 employees, thank you and welcome, and I'm privileged to be a part of this celebration today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Daphne Hobson, our president of our local chapter, to tell us about Colonial Dames.
The National Society Colonial Dames, 17th century, was organized July the 15th, 1915 during a meeting of the International Genealogical Congress at Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco, California. The society was founded to aid in the establishment of a college of heraldry and to aid in the founding of chairs of historical research in colleges and universities and to commemorate the heroic deeds of the founders of our great republic in order that men and women may be inspired to follow their example. The object of the Society of the National Society Colonial Dames 17th century shall be to aid in the preservation of the records and of the historical sites of our country, to foster interest in historical colonial research, and to aid in the education of the youth of our country, to commemorate the noble and historical deeds of our ancestors, the founders of our great republic, and to maintain zealously those high principles of virtue, courage, and patriotism which led to the independence of the colonies and to the foundation and establishment of the United States of America. The Reverend Pierre Robert Chapter was organized February 15, 1983, and the chapter charter was presented by President Mrs. Edward Petrowski, and it was named after Reverend Pierre Robert, who came to South Carolina in 1686 and served as the first minister of the French Huguenot Church in the parish of St. James, Santee, French Santee, South Carolina, a position he held from 1686 to 1710.
Thank you, Daphne. I now ask Eric Montgomery to come forward and give us the history of these buildings and what has happened.
Thank you, Francis, and thank you for inviting me to participate. This is a project that's near and dear to my heart. I've been involved in it since day one, so I was honored to ask to give you the history of the buildings and also how we got here today. When a building has existed in a community for over 150 years, there are stories to tell about what happened there. Today I've been asked to give you the Cliff Notes version of those stories for both the Temple and Court of Ordinary buildings, which will soon have historical markers placed on them to bear witness to their historical significance to our community. First, let's start with the Congregation Children of Israel Synagogue building, known as the Temple. In 1845, a Hebrew school was founded in Augusta with about 6 Jewish families who lived here. The next year, 1846, the first Jewish congregation in Augusta was organized. It was named B'nai Israel in Hebrew, which is translated as Children of Israel in English. The first of 7 Jewish sections in Magnolia Cemetery was donated to the congregation about that time. The Congregation Children of Israel in Augusta is the second oldest Jewish congregation in Georgia after McVie Israel in Savannah. Our building, however, is the oldest existing building that is left standing in Georgia. And I had a kind of a fight with my colleague down in Savannah when I announced that. They don't like me second for anything. Before the Telfair Street Temple was constructed, the congregation had been leasing the former Unitarian Church building at the northeast corner of 8th and Green Streets from Isaac Henry, a local Jewish banker. This is now the location where the Jesse Norman School of the Arts is held, although the original building was demolished in the 1880s, so the Jesse Norman School is a much later building. The Augusta congregation slowly emerged as a Reformed congregation in the first decades of its existence. In 1863, during the Civil War, the trustees of the congregation bought a lot on Telfair Street, the lot where the building is located today. And it was purchased from a man named Wiley Griffin for $6,000. That was a lot of money in 1863. The three trustees named on the deed were Lewis Levy, Isaac Mayer, and Henry Myers. In 1869, the cornerstone of the synagogue was laid by Isaac M. Wise, who was known as the father of the American Jewish Reform movement. So that was quite a significant task because he came down from, I forgot where he lived, somewhere in the north. But that was considered an important event, not just locally, but internationally. And the building with its monumental portico with 4 pillars was completed in 1872. It cost about $15,000 to build, and as I said, it is now the oldest existing building built as a synagogue in the state of Georgia. A second congregation, an Orthodox congregation, was founded in 1891, and it's known as Addis Yeshua. Originally on Telfair Street and later on Ellis Street, it has been located on Johns Road since the 1950s. The Telfair Street Temple remained in use as a synagogue until 1950, when the Congregation Children of Israel moved to its new building on Walton Way, the one that's now known as the Walton Way Temple at the corner of Bransford Road. The old building here on Telfair Street was sold also in 1950 to a local engineering firm, Patchen and Zimmerman, and they sold it for $16,800, which is interesting. Didn't I say it cost $16,000 to build it in 1870? That's amazing. So it depreciated quite a bit. They converted it into their offices. Many changes were made, including adding a second floor and a metal spiral staircase, and generally covering or removing all original interior finishes. There's evidence that there was a fire when likely the steel beams that were added to put in the second floor. When we recently deconstructed it, we found evidence of fire all over the building in the front part. In 1967, the temple, then known as the Patchen Building, was purchased by the Richmond County Commission for $90,100. It was used as offices by the county for nearly 50 years, and the offices that are used, mostly were there with the Planning Commission, the Community Development Office, Human Relations, and later years, part of the Internet Technology offices were located and housed in the building. So after the new Judicial Center was built on James Brown Boulevard at the corner of Walton Way in 2011, the Superior Court and the Probate Court both moved there from the municipal building, the building that we're in now. And that largely left the synagogue building empty. The municipal building, this building, was subsequently remodeled, and when it was complete, many outlying county offices, including planning, moved over here from across the parking lot, and that vacated the temple building. The new IT building, which is, you might be able to see it out this window over here, was completed in 2015, and that meant the ground floor of the Patchen building, of the old temple building, was also vacant. Okay, now let's switch quickly to the Court of Ordinary. That's the smaller building where the Jewish Museum has already opened. Courthouse fires in the 1850s regularly occurred throughout Georgia and the Southeast. And the Richmond County Clerks of Superior Court and the Clerk of Ordinary were in the old City Hall, which stood right where we are now. It's set here in this location where we're sitting today, and there were open fireplaces used for heat in the building. So they began to worry, well, we don't want this to happen to our courthouse. So in 1858, the decision was made to build a fireproof building, or what they thought was one at that time, and to house the county's records. So a property was purchased adjacent to the City Hall lot, right over here where the Court of Ordinary is now. The new building would have masonry walls, masonry floors, and even a masonry ceiling, which is still there, believe it or not. If you get a chance to go over there, I think there's a way we can peek up there and show you that. So it was considered fireproof. It had 2 vaults, one for the Superior Court clerk and one for the Inferior Court clerk, or also called the Court of the Ordinary. Now that's the probate court. Today, most of the functions of the Court of Ordinary are fulfilled by the probate court and the county commission. The building was completed in 1860. It housed most of Richmond County's official records, such as wills, estate files, marriage records, deeds, mortgages, court minutes, lots of records. Due to that building, for nearly 100 years, from 1860 until the municipal building was built in 1950, completed in 1957, it protected those records, and consequently, Richmond County has probably one of the most intact sets of records in the entire in the state. Many of which, some of which date back to 1777 and before, when the county was founded. The municipal building, as I said, was completed in 1957. The old city hall or courthouse, which sat right where we are, was demolished the following year, because actually the municipal building was built in front of the courthouse, and the courthouse sat in front of it. When they finished the municipal building, they moved everything over there, and then they tore down the old city hall. And had new clerk's offices designed for the records, and for both superior and probate courts by that time. And the Court of Ordinary became other offices. It was long used as a county print shop, and eventually some of the IT offices were later moved into that building. So fast forward, 2015, the new IT building that I mentioned over here was completed and located, was built adjacent to the municipal building. The Court of Ordinary and the Temple buildings were declared surplus by the City Commission, and there was a proposal to demolish both of them for about a dozen parking places. Recognizing both as significant historic buildings, Historic Augusta rallied its members to encourage the City Commission to not demolish the buildings. Members of the Jewish community, led by the late Jack Steinberg, also showed up to plead for saving the buildings. Jack proposed allowing them to be developed as a new Augusta Jewish Museum. So we joined forces, and after much lobbying and negotiation, this was agreed. Since Augusta Jewish Museum didn't actually exist at that time, a 5-year lease was drawn up in 2016, with Historic Augusta as the lessee. The lease included a number of benchmarks that were required over the 5-year period. If the benchmarks were all met, the city would deed the property to Historic Augusta. So in July 2021, I won't go through all the benchmarks, there were a lot of them, but we met every one, and all the benchmarks had been met, and phase 1 of the Augusta Jewish Museum was opened. Later that fall, Historic Augusta actually deeded it from Historic Augusta to the Augusta Jewish Museum, reserving a preservation, which is a legal document, preservation easement, which is a legal document to ensure its protection in perpetuity. Phase 2 will be the restoration of the temple. Work has begun by removing the inappropriate alterations, including asbestos and lead paint. Funds are still needed to complete the temple restoration, but the building is protected, awaiting that next phase. Thank you for your attention, and hopefully you will now better understand the significance of these buildings to the history of our city and why it was so important to save them both. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. He deserves his title. Executive Director of Historic Augusta. I now ask Ms. Pelton and Ms. Hobson to come forward, and Mr. Weinstein to come forward, and they will unveil the plaques that are going to be placed on the museums. And after that, Mr. Weinstein is going to speak to us on the future of the building.
Are you going to do it together? Oh, okay. We haven't practiced this. Ready? Go.
Thank you so much.
Very
No, don't lose paper.
Like I said before, the buildings we started in 15 and saving it, and then we finally got the ownership of the property. And the idea was to start this in the small building, the ordinary building, and we've got that complete, with the exception of the displays are being constructed right now and should be ready within the next few months. The other building is the cornerstone of what we need, and we just got to continue fundraising to get that done. But now I'll read this, so do what they told us. On behalf of the board and volunteers of Augusta Jewish Museum, we appreciate On behalf of the board and volunteers of the Augusta Jewish Museum, we appreciate the interest of the Colonial Dames 17th Century organization for their support of our project, which chronicles the life and history and contributions of the Jewish community in the Augusta, Georgia, Aiken, South Carolina areas. We're grateful to the Reverend Pierre Robert Chapter for donating the plaques to these historic buildings. Just recently, AJM did a program, Jewish Heritage in Waynesboro, for the chapter, and we look forward to future programs with other Colonial Dames chapters. Waynesboro, one of the things we have is in all of those areas, all small towns had the same thing. There were small merchants in every town, and we're working one at a time to learn the history there and be able to get them involved in what we're doing. Our board and collections manager, Alina Rich, who's hiding right over there. Our display committee, which is Judy Gary, Fran Clinton, Jackie and Michael Cohen. With them, they're now working with the committee to get to the company H&W exhibits, which we've contracted to get that done. They've done a lot of work, a lot of detailed work to really present everything the way it needs to be done. Phase 2, like was said before, is the renovation of the Telfair Street, and we actually create a cultural center and a rental venue. With the help of Jack Steinberg's dream, he'll finally get a complete reality to what he worked so hard for. We actually have 4 pillars, and the 4 pillars over there, because of the 4 pillars on the building that we're trying to do in the education part. Jack's original thing was to do things, save the building, and educate people. We have Jewish life and traditions. We have remembering the Holocaust. We have Israel, the land and its peoples are already here now. And what's there right now is what the Jewish people have done for the CSRA since 1802. And then we've got a film that you're going to be able to see over there, Remembering Our Place in History, which was a partnership with Jesse Norman School of Arts. And we're funded by a grant, Georgia Humanities, with the production by respected videographer Mark Alberton and noted historian Leanne Caldwell. Both of us should be here today. Would you please stand? What we'll do is we're going to show the film here. We were going to do it next door, but we felt that in case of the number of people and the possibility of heavy rains, that Mark should do his presentation in just a minute. When it's over, Miss Augusta Quinn Shell will escort people over to the other building to have individual tours. Thank you very much. Mark.
Just a quick background. This is a very rough incarnation, but it gives you an idea of some of the wonderful interviews we were able to capture, and we will continue to capture with this project. So hope you enjoy.
In the early part of the century, I would say 95% of the Jewish people lived below 5th Street. And at one time now, earlier, say from 1900 to 1915, some lived on Ellis Street and on Reynolds Street and on Upper Green. The majority of the Jewish people, right before World War II, lived from 5th Street down, on Broad and on Green Street, and on the side streets, some lived on 2nd Street and 3rd Street and things like that.
Rubin's Department Store, which is an older one, I remember that. I remember when they had a fire and burned down and rebuilt. The jewelry stores, Tenenbaum's jewelry stores, and you had Edelstein's originally Army store, which is now an antique place that's going out of business. And across the street, there was a beautiful building that completely burned down. It's called the Silver Block. In apartments, it was made by, I think, out of stone, the frontage.
We were members of the synagogue, and we did go to events at the synagogue. But we were not the only store that carried, well, shoes, for instance. There was Rosenthal Shoes, our friendly competitor, a couple of doors east of 972 Broad Street. There were pawn shops that the Jewish operated. There were ladies' dress shops. There were just any number of places all along Broad Street. But I'm sure there were people of all sorts of trades. There was the Moog Sign Company, Joe Moog, that had his business one time, I think, on Lower Broad Street, later on East Boundary. And his family was early on in Augusta.
KB store that was Jewish owned. I worked there when I was a youngster. And just about all the young Jewish boys worked in some store there. Of course, the biggest shoe company around was a company called S&J Simowitz. They owned Bernie shoes and Maryland shoes, and they later became Butler shoes. Or they later sold the Butler shoes or something. But they became a huge chain. And of course, Friedman's was down there.
They had two kosher butchers here. One was the Shapiro's and one was Leaky's. They were competitors. And they used to go to synagogue at every annual meeting and vote who was going to be the kosher butcher this year, who was going to be. And it depends if I made you mad, if you got a little fat, a little too much bone, we didn't get your vote.
He was getting involved with whatever musicians were already in Augusta, mainly people at the medical college or people out at Camp Gordon, as it was back then. And so in I came here in 49. In 53, I think, they were getting ready, they were messing around with getting an orchestra together. There had been something here called, I think, the Little Symphony. It was all strings, if I'm not mistaken. So now he was working on getting an orchestra together. So I know he went to the bank and he borrowed $500 for the timpani. And so they just started up, and it was all volunteer. Anybody there? I have some clippings from newspapers where they're calling for anybody who can play an instrument. Please come, because we need everything. So the thing started up, and it's still going.
Well, it was a developing country. And where I stayed, there was one hotel on the Tel Aviv border, and that was the best hotel in town. That's where the executives used to stay, and that's where I stayed. Well, they were building up different kinds of industry. I had to help them get license to export cotton fabric to the United States. Because they were trying to bring in a lot of cotton fabric. So we brought it into the United States, and everybody was happy. I took some lessons of French, and I learned the French, and then my Jewish in Germany, so I was able to get along with French and German. And then when it came to come down to Milan, I asked where the hotel was. They said that right over there. I thought the guy was crazy. I didn't believe it was so close.
So there was a man named the Rebbe. Have you heard of him? So he was like a really, really great rabbi, and he made it like a really big goal to every single Jew, to reach every single Jew and inspiring them and bring them back to Judaism. And he sent thousands. I think there's now over 5,000 of his followers as emissaries to go to different little towns and places and bring Judaism to that place. So my parents were given the option to go and spread Judaism in a place. And so they were given a couple options, and one of them was Augusta, and that's the one they chose. So it's a really big privilege for me to be an emissary of such a great man and to be able to spread Judaism to the people here.
It was an Orthodox congregation. It had a balcony. The women sat in the balcony. But we had a very nice, I mean, a lot of things that you think you remember, you only remember because your family talked about it. But I do remember going there and since at kindergarten age, my parents moved to the Hill. A lot of Jewish families, and I don't know whether you've heard this from other people, lived at the Broadway Apartments on Broad Street. It's still there. It's right below 5th Street. And it's a very attractive place. And a lot of the families, that's where we lived. But we left there ahead of some of the others because I had an older brother, my only sibling, and they felt like we needed to move out of downtown. So during the years that I remember going to the synagogue, we lived on the hill. A lot of the Jewish families still lived downtown. They lived on Lower Broad Street. I had my aunts that in this picture lived on Lower Green Street. But anyway, I do remember going to that synagogue, my brother went to Hebrew classes, but our synagogue didn't offer that for girls back then.
We had two teachers back then, a husband and wife, Simon and Miriam Zipper. And they lived on Ellis Street in the 1200 block, when a lot of Jewish people still lived downtown. But over time, the Jewish population migrated up the hill, and that's one of the reasons that the synagogue moved to Johns Road. As has happened with, for instance, let's say, Sacred Heart. It closed as a church because the congregation migrated further west in Augusta. And so, thank goodness it was saved, but the synagogue building was not safe. A, we no longer owned it, and B, after it had been there a while, it was used as a warehouse, storage, and whatever, and it burned. It wasn't arson, it was just something happened and the old building burned. So 1120 Ellis Street as such does not exist anymore.
I slept in my parents' room, and with my little sister there too. And my grandmother had her own room. My grandmother was at the time, I think, 70 years old, and she had her own room. So in the morning, about 7:30 in the morning, we heard a big bang at the door, and so my father went to open, and we had 4 German soldiers with machine guns that came in and wanted to talk to my father, of course. I didn't know at the time that my father knew German. The only thing I know about that is that he was in the army in the First World War, and maybe that's why he learned German, but he never told me, so I had no idea, and I still don't know. today. So he was speaking to them, and after a little while, I saw him on his knees, and I assumed, because I couldn't understand the language, that he was begging them to leave us behind. And I didn't know if they knew about my grandmother, but they probably did also. So he asked that they would leave us behind. And he told them that we had a big trunk in the room, which is they saw and they could have taken if they wanted to. And that we had all our valuables there, because at the time you couldn't leave as a Dutch Jew. You couldn't have anything in the banks anyway. It wasn't safe to have anything there. So we had all our valuables. Of course, I didn't know what they were. I was 12 or 13 then, and I had no idea. I just knew that we had valuables. My mother, probably jewelry, money. We couldn't have money anyplace else. So he told them. That's what I assumed, that he would give them everything we had if they would leave the children behind. And so I guess they agreed, because we're still here. And my father said, we have a little bit of money that I was able to take away from the trunk. You have to take it and bring it to your grandmother, because that's all is left, and you'll have nothing else. So I said, they were still in the room. I was very scared. I said, I can't do it. He said, you have to do it. You have no choice, because that's all you have. So in the end, I saw the money. I put all kind of towels on top of it. And I took the bunch, and they didn't say anything. I guess they were just happy with what was in the trunk, I suppose. And then I brought it to my grandmother in a room, and I explained to her what was going on. And later on, they took my parents down, and they sat in a trunk in a car. So I sat in front of the car. And I sat on the grass until they took them out, because there were other Jewish people in that village. There was a long list, so they took everybody, and until everybody was in the cars, then they took my parents as well. We received a letter from my mother, and she was saying that they had taken them to Paris and put them in jail for 1 week. And after that, they put them on the train that was probably going to go to a camp. She wasn't sure what was going on, but that's what she said. And she was also, what was happening in those years is that people that were taken to concentration camps and were on trains were throwing letters out through the windows or what, and people that were nice enough that were picking them up and mailing those letters. So mostly people that were working on the tracks were picking up those letters and mailing them, and that's the way that we got her letter, where she was saying that where they were and on the way that they were on to a camp. She didn't have many details, and she wanted me to take care of my little sister and make sure that she was well, and my grandmother, and that's mostly what she was worried about. She was also worried that we would get a letter saying that we're coming to visit you and so on. She was afraid that they would come and pick us up, and so she would send this, a note telling us, don't send back any letter, don't say that you're there, don't say anything.
Are we dismissed then?
Yes.
We'll adjourn to the museum.
You said it.